Welcome to the ASG Technologies presentation, DevOps, Mainframes, and Culture Change, Removing Barriers to Successful Transformation. My name is Anna Murray, and I am a Senior Product Manager at ASG Technologies and currently responsible for mainframe productivity solutions. Throughout my career, I have worked with development teams, sales, marketing, and executives to ensure the success of enterprise software solutions. In today's session, first we're going to review some history and talk about the truth about mainframe space. You will probably know this, but it's worth talking about. Next, we'll talk about the current state of DevOps in the mainframe world. Then we will quickly review why is DevOps so important? How are other organizations accomplishing this transition? Then we'll wrap up by stepping out of the theoretical and discuss some real-world solutions to DevOps transition challenges. Today's mainframe has evolved to become a modern and powerful system. We started off with machines that were the size of houses, packed with vacuum tubes with ridiculous power needs and many places to fail. We progressed to the point where programs could be entered via punch cards. Today we know how dangerous manual intervention is, and punch cards really epitomize that problem. They were slow to process and prone to simple accidents like dropping the card deck or getting a single card in the wrong order, causing a failure, and then having to wait in line for the next time you got to try and run the program. The 70s and 80s gave us terminals and allowed us to enter programs in an editor and no longer needing to wait for punch decks to run through. That was a great advance, right? But mainframes now run among the fastest chipsets that there are and have gone from being water-cooled monsters to now fitting into a standard data center rack with no special need for power or cooling. Every new rendition of the mainframe as we know it becomes more efficient and more capable of powering today's businesses into and beyond the next age of technology. If you think of how far we have come, it is astounding. It took computers the size of houses to send man to the moon. Today, my smartwatch has more power than those systems. We need to keep improving our practices to exploit the technology that we have available to us. I realize this audience is most likely aware of this, but it is always worth repeating. Because worldwide, 92 of the top 100 banks, 6 of the 10 largest retailers, 10 of the largest insurers, 23 of the 25 largest airlines, they all still use IBM mainframes. And think about this, 87% of all credit card transactions and nearly $8 trillion in payments per year go through mainframes. 4 billion passenger flights and 30 billion transactions every day. Compare that to 5.6 million Google searches per day. It's a huge gap. And the number of installed MIPS around the world is at an all-time high. So if that's the truth about mainframes, what's the truth about mainframe programmers? Original mainframe developers were explorers. They were innovators. For example, IBM IMS was created for the Apollo program, and it's still in use today. You may recognize that photo. And here is Grace Hopper a few decades later. She led the development of the COBOL language that is still going very strong. So what about today's programmers? They range in age from their 20s to their 70s and from every conceivable race. There is a strong heritage of pioneering and exploring. And why should that be any different today? Given all that positive information about mainframes, DevOps adoption in the mainframe world has had some challenges. It has been slower coming to the game, but it is picking up momentum. As organizations are finally embracing the fact that the mainframe is a critical component of the business. They're adding mainframes to the DevOps conversation. All right, so why has it been slower to the party? Well, you guys probably know this, the workforce is changing. Older workers skilled in mainframes are retiring, while younger workers are less interested in assuming these roles, or worse still, these younger workers don't even know that these roles exist. As they enter the development world, these younger workers do want consistency with UI and experience, no matter what platform they are working with. While DevOps is becoming standard practice among so many companies, there is still resistance to inclusion of mainframe in the DevOps cycle. I recently participated in a joint webinar with Paul Casson, a product owner at CompuWare, and one of the questions we asked in our survey was, what are your biggest concerns with your mainframe development? And a full 40% of responses had to do with a cultural struggle within mainframe organizations that are still hesitating to adopt DevOps practices. One of these answers epitomized the issue, and I quote, this was just earlier this year in 2020, and they said, "Our enterprise architecture group doesn't think that mainframe development can do DevOps." That answer really surprised me because I know how powerful the mainframe is, and I know how amazing mainframe programmers are. So we know that there's a cultural struggle there. Finally, agile environments are also becoming common practice because companies are realizing the value of these practices, enabling them to manage and optimize the performance of the mainframe. Agile transition has also been slow for the mainframe companies to adopt for similar reasons as DevOps. It's culture. The company culture really must change, and decades of inertia can really be hard to overcome. So why the hesitation? I kind of think it comes back down to a base fear of the unknown. For most of us, process change is not something we're really happy about. But when I think about my own story, for my entire career, I have been a force for change, and I look for ways to continuously improve. And that's part of my professional culture. And then I move into something on a more personal nature. And one day my husband said, "Hey, how about we learn to sail? Because we live near some water." And I was instantly afraid. And I thought, well, that's weird, right? It's just something new. And he said, "Why are you afraid?" And I said, "Well, I'm a terrible swimmer." And he said, "Dear, if you're sailing, you shouldn't have to swim." And, it was a very clear picture to me. I needed to learn. I needed knowledge. I needed to understand. And so we went and got certified. And I turned from being afraid of this change to loving it. It's an exhilarating experience. And so it's a very good example of why when we're afraid, we should get knowledge and we should find understanding to move forward. And I love this quote from Adrian Cockcroft. When he was at Netflix, he said, "Do painful things more frequently so you can make it less painful." It's such a good way to approach change that we think is good, but it's painful, is keep doing it. And DevOps is a process, right? So you have to repeat what you're doing. You have to go back and fix what's not working and try again and again till you get it right. And companies who have made this transition will tell you how much benefit it has brought, not only the company, but the employees. So why is DevOps so important? We need agile and integrated processes between departments to be prepared for digital disruption. Beyond digital disruption, what about business disruption like this pandemic has imposed upon us? The whole world has to adapt to virtual meetings and finding better solutions to make these virtual interactions good. It's a little scary that only 44% of the respondents to this poll that I have on the screen thought that organizations were adequately prepared. On the other hand, a nice high percentage of respondents say that their organizations are actively engaging in the culture change required to become more agile and be prepared to handle disruption. I don't know if any of you have read The Phoenix Project or The Unicorn Project by Gene Kim, but I highly recommend them as a great support for culture change. They provide a fun way to examine DevOps in general because they are novels. I could feel the stress coming off the pages and even the little victories that happened. So the Unicorn Project presents 5 ideals, the fourth of which is the ideal of psychological safety. It is the cornerstone that supports the other ideals in the book. This is so important for creating the space for an organization to make a shift to DevOps. The ideal makes it safe for people to make mistakes, right? To try again and make changes and go forward and keep the transition happening. So that ideal of psychological safety supports the 5th ideal, which is the one that's the reason behind everything we do. That is customer focus. When looking at implementing DevOps, the goal is to increase customer satisfaction, whether the customer is internal or external, and to do that in a measurable way. Making the customer focus the main thing makes sure that when we deliver something, it is what benefits the customer experience. To achieve the highest level of customer satisfaction, there has to be a collaborative effort between IT operations and development. If development focuses on developing the best new widget or app that the customers want and validate it through user groups and research, then surely that's enough. You're being customer focused, right? However, what happens when the customer opens up the new app to be presented with the best designed, most feature-rich thing that they have ever seen, but then finds out that after every click, they have to wait 30 to 60 seconds before getting a response, or even worse, get no response? Any market edge the new thing could have gained actually turns into a disaster with customers leaving to try the other thing your competition brings out. This is one of the simplest examples of why ops is vital in this chain. Including ops from the beginning and in constant partnership through the development and deployment lifecycle helps ensure that failed or rolled back launches don't ever happen. This starts with making repeatable and easy to stand up environments for developers, making virtualized and non-virtualized testing easy for them to perform, involving DBAs to make sure you're not going to kill the database or need them to use so much infrastructure that the organization is going to groan to a halt. Making sure there is enough computing power to deliver on promises, then constant feedback loops on requirements and performance, and progress through the DevOps loop is required. You can shorten those feedback loops with dev and ops both working together in an environment without fear of failure or asking silly questions. Focus, flow, and joy of work should follow, leading to higher customer satisfaction and development and ops achieving greater things faster. They will be creating features that users actually need and finding a kind of joy in their work that may have been absent for a long time. So we have talked about why you need DevOps and how it benefits organizations in general. Now let's take a look at how some companies have fared in their move to a better, more joyful way of working. As you can see from this slide, 91% of survey respondents use DevOps in some way, but it seems to be in a fairly siloed way. This leads to all sorts of issues. One part of the business is working faster and more efficiently than another, and teams are left waiting for resources that may take ages to occur. A few years ago, there was an idea of Bimodal IT, whereby the distributed teams would work in a fast, agile pattern, and mainframes wouldn't or couldn't. Thankfully, this idea has been debunked, but in order to overcome the problems this sort of velocity disparity causes, everyone needs to be brought into the same way of working. I followed the story of one organization who had the seeds of DevOps growing within the development team. They were dissatisfied with how hard it was to get features into customers' hands and began trying to get DevOps going. The culture started to spread through the team and over to operations. Ultimately, the CEO was presented with the idea and he said, "Sure, go for it." Great, but really that was a problem. The CEO didn't really buy in and he didn't sponsor the shift. He was just allowing it to happen. So when the team hit just a few hiccups where they didn't feel successful with the change, they threw out the whole thing. Have you heard the saying, "Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater"? Well, that's exactly what they did. It was really sad, and it left a lot of people disappointed and frustrated. So in my experience, the best way to successfully implement DevOps, a more efficient way of working and making everyone happier, from employees to customers, is to change the entire culture of an organization. I've worked with another company that embraced the culture shift that was needed to radically alter the way they work and the way they service their customers. They took a very harsh approach to make the shift and never looked back. Everyone was trained in what they were going to do and how they were going to do it. Then one day, they flipped the switch, and there were no lifeboats. They couldn't go back. The CEO was the leader of that change. And because it was done from the top down, the leadership encouraged a culture of failing fast, and smaller feedback loops happened after that. The end result was a large upturn in employee engagement, cash flow, and customer satisfaction. That is what we are all going for. This is a case study of one of ASG's customers who is in the midst of their DevOps transformation. Part of that transformation does involve adding JCL scanning to their DevOps toolchain. This major credit card processor wanted two things. First, to include JCL scanning inside of CompuWare Topaz Workbench. Second, to include JCL scanning as part of their continuous integration, continuous deployment process using RESTful web service calls. They said that the plugin for Topaz closes a gap in their Mainframe DevOps tooling by allowing application developers to validate their JCL from within a single interface. This eliminates the need for the user to swap back over to a green screen TSO session and use the JCL interface. They also expect that users will be more inclined to stay within the Topaz Workbench IDE. When their developers first started using Topaz, one of the first questions they asked was, can we validate our JCL from Topaz? Since they have been using that JCL management software for many years. The main benefit to them was to close the DevOps tool gap and allow their users to be more inclined to adopt the new tooling that they had invested so much in with CompuWare. Another real-world example is ASG Technologies itself. This is an approximation of how our DevOps architecture works. It definitely paints a picture of how many tools there are in the DevOps tool chain. DevOps changes are driving many organizations to focus on the tools they use to manage mainframe operations. We're all looking for modern approaches with centralized user interfaces to streamline work and also to attract the new generation of developers. All of these tools include APIs for integration with the overall environment to increase automation, which supports the uptime requirements and frequent releases of changes across these environments. I want to dive a little deeper into that DevOps architecture. As we dive deeper into the everyday real DevOps story, we certainly get to lifecycle management. And let's talk about JCL since we're in mainframe shops. We start in production at the top right-hand corner here, where we know we have well-formed and working JCL. Then someone asks us to make a change. Moving left across the diagram, we export and check out the JCL to our lifecycle manager. The next step is to transform that JCL to work within the development environment so that we can begin applying those required changes. Then as we are checking the JCL into the Lifecycle Manager, we trigger the JCL management solution to reformat JCL, validate it for all of the required company standards, and make sure it's formatted for easy editing. When we're ready, the JCL is promoted into the test environment and goes under a transformation according to a predefined set of rules that make sure that development names get turned into test names. After testing, we move forward through the lifecycle to user acceptance testing, where the JCL is yet again transformed and updated so it's going to work in that environment. Finally, it's promoted back into production, and the last transformation occurs to rename all of the components into production and make sure that it's going to work there before it executes. This process shows how JCL changes and validation are required at multiple stages of the JCL lifecycle, and we're just talking about a single JCL package here. Standards and automation are critical for any efficient data center. This is a well-known fact. It is just as important for JCL as for any other production code. While we're talking about JCL, I'd like to explain how our JCL management solution fits in that DevOps tool chain. So Eclipse is a very popular open source Java integrated development environment, or IDE. Part of its popularity is that it supports virtually unlimited customization and extension. It is so popular that other companies like CompuWare and IBM have built solutions based on that Eclipse standard. In ASG Pro JCL, we have an Eclipse plugin that can run on vanilla Eclipse environment within CompuWare Topaz or IBM IDZ. This supports DevOps initiatives by reducing context switching for developers so they can stay in their preferred IDE. The ASG Pro JCL server is installed on the mainframe, and it comes with RESTful web services. Our plugin in Eclipse communicates with the server over that RESTful API, which leads us to another benefit. Continuous integration, continuous deployment solutions can use that very same RESTful API to automate JCL validation and scanning. Now let's zoom back out to what it takes to coordinate all of the activity across the many tools in the DevOps toolchain. According to a recent EMA survey, 78% of the respondents said that scheduling is a strategy in their corporation. And certainly, strategy is so important when figuring out the best way to integrate our DevOps toolchain, right? So that the point is not lost, those people involved in scheduling are those that are identifying the dependencies, setting up the triggers, designing and testing the network of events. It is something enterprises are taking very seriously. Whether the cross-application updates take place in real time or whether they are batched, making sure that those systems are updated can make the difference between a smooth running business operation and one that struggles with errors and delays. These schedulers are among the most skilled and trusted members of the DevOps teams because the business success depends on these people and their chosen tool. For example, the right tool enables a team of 12 to turn over their end-to-end production workload for an entire chain of 150 grocery stores. This team has learned the automation tool and institutionalized it into their routine development practices. Orchestration occurs when an automation engineer designs, tests, implements, and ultimately configures the rules that define the events that occur to trigger the proper sequence of tasks, regardless of task type, technology type, or platform type. That's a lot of types. Orchestration tools must know something about everything, and sometimes a lot more. Whether it's a click on an ad or a shopping cart checkout operation, an elaborate sequence of files and databases get updated and transferred back and forth, and it's the automation engineer's job to set it up to run with the highest degree of success. It's the job of the automation product to set him up for success with ever-increasing number of automation tooling interfaces and DevOps techniques. Technology has become so prolific that we have the potential to deal with hundreds of different software packages and hardware resources on-premise and in the cloud. So we have to figure out how to organize everything and to orchestrate it. Enterprise value streams are the way to bridge multiple technology stacks. What we mean by that is an end-to-end process that delivers a solution. This is a good example of an orchestrated value stream. It starts in Zendesk with a support ticket, then moves into Jira, then a development LPAR, then QA LPAR, then user acceptance testing LPAR, then packaging for delivery back to the customer. And the truth is that many enterprise value streams continue to be mainframe dependent because they need this part of the technology stack to consume significant inputs and contribute critical outputs to value streams. So when we think about DevOps, part of that process is the software development lifecycle. Testing in DevOps spans the whole software development and delivery lifecycle. Testers are no longer focusing on functional testing and feature verification. These testers are also involved in operations testing, performance testing, basic security testing, as well as being able to monitor and analyze production data and logs. And this requires lots of automation. I want to circle back to this thought before I leave you. Be inspired to pioneer and explore. And remember that when you do painful things more frequently, they will become less painful. Thank you for your time today. It was a pleasure speaking with you.